strategically a very important country. It really is the crossroads into South Asia, into the Middle East, into Western Asia, into Central Asia, etc. So the United States has strategic interests in that area. As far as the war itself goes, the war has continued to go downhill. Not only have civilian casualties gone up and American casualties gone up, but the fact of the matter is that the current strategy of assassinating the Taliban leadership is actually making the situation worse. Because what we're doing is we're getting rid of the older, more experienced Taliban leaders, and the baton is passing to much younger and more fundamentalist and more radical sections of the Taliban. There has to be a political settlement. Who are we going to talk to? This war has been a catastrophe from the beginning. And one other thing too is that I think it probably is the beginning of the end for the North American Treaty Organization.
Okay, what about you, Mr. Chandan? What's your perspective on this? Why do you think that Washington still remains in Afghanistan, and why haven't they been able to bring security to the country in almost a decade?
I'd like to start off with a quote from Ronald Reagan vis-a-vis Afghanistan. He said, "To watch the courageous Afghan freedom fighters battle modern arsenals with simple handheld weapons is an inspiration to those who love freedom. Their courage teaches us a great lesson, that there are things in this world worth defending." Now, of course, he was talking about the interest for US hegemony across the world. But what happened today in Afghanistan and what's been happening with the national resistance, which is the Taliban, is a resistance against the shock and awe, the full spectrum dominance that the United States and its hegemonic interests try to establish across the world. What the Taliban have done, they have resisted successfully in classic popular guerrilla tactics against the greatest military bullying force in the world, which is NATO. When the Americans and NATO went into Afghanistan, they thought they could intimidate the whole world with their so-called shock and awe and full spectrum dominance. But what happened, because of the Second Intifada, because of the Afghan resistance, which is under the leadership of the Taliban are not my ideological bedfellows, but nevertheless they are the only national resistance there. And because of the resistance in Iraq, what we are seeing now is we're moving away from the era of a US and Western offensive that's being resisted but is not succeeding, to an era of victories against US hegemony and Western hegemony. And indicative of that was the 2006 Hezbollah victory against the Zionist state. And today, it's Gaddafi's resistance and the Libyan people's resistance against NATO, where the NATO campaign against Libya is in a complete debacle. But now NATO is on the doorsteps of Syria. The Russian envoy to NATO has expressed this just yesterday. So really, after the Intifada, after Iraq, after Afghanistan, after US hegemonic interest to surround Iraq and Iran, as your previous guest said correctly, but also missing out the crucial C word, encircling and trying to bring to heel China. That is also what these wars are about. We are seeing now NATO and the West in a complete military and economic debacle and morass. And really now it's time for the Global South to unite, to see the bigger picture, to see what's happening in Syria is an attack on Palestine. If Libya fell, Algeria would have been next, and Syria would have been next. If Syria falls, Hezbollah will be next, and Palestine will be next, and Iran will be embroiled with it. We really have to step back and see what's going on, and not fall for the nonsense coming out of some of the mainstream media, including Al Jazeera, which seems to have more the interests of US and Israeli hegemonic interests in the region than it does the resistance positions of our people.
Well, Mr. Mir, you're sitting in Afghanistan. Now, what's your take on what our previous speaker, Mr. Chandan, has said? And also Mr. Hallinan, who said that this is going to be the end of NATO. And also they're saying that the picture is much bigger than it appears. It's a lot more complicated than it appears with the US-led forces in Afghanistan. Your take on that, sir?
I have, with due respect for your guest, I totally disagree with them. We in Afghanistan, we have left to conflict for the past 3 decades. So every day Afghans are falling, either Afghan soldiers or civilians. So we don't consider NATO as an invading force or NATO as an occupying force. We consider NATO as a liberator force because we have to remember Afghanistan under the Taliban ruling, and at least we have tremendous achievements since 2001. But the conflict continues in Afghanistan. It is not because simply the Taliban are freedom fighters. We have Pakistan behind the Taliban. We have the charities that are coming from all the Gulf countries, and they are supporting Taliban. We have all these anti-American elements that they want to take their revenge in Afghanistan. They are supporting the Taliban. But the Afghan people, they want democracy in Afghanistan. Democracy is functioning. We had 2 presidential elections. We had 2 parliamentary elections. The war is difficult. We fully understand it. And we are sure that we would achieve. The Afghan people support the international mission in Iran. The difficulties will be removed. We certainly criticize the way the war is conducted in Afghanistan, and we Afghans from day one asked for more responsibility. We fought the former Soviet regime in Afghanistan. We defeated the former Soviet regime and the Red Army. We are capable of taking control of our own country, but NATO did not allow us from the beginning, and now I think we are in the right track. With the transition going on, if we are able to take full transition by 2014, I think there's enough capacity in Afghanistan, enough political will in Afghanistan to defend our country by ourselves. But we need the support of the international community for some time, because we need to rebuild a viable economy for Afghanistan, which is very important. We need to rebuild our society, because the Afghan society is very much fragmented because of 3 decades of conflict. And I think we don't consider, certainly there are a lot of these controversial theories that are going on in the region, and they consider America and the rest of NATO a war against Islamic countries, but we don't believe in these theories.
Let me jump in here. You talk about controversial theories. Do you think, are your people safer today than they were 10 years ago, prior to the U.S. Invading the country? We have this year, so far in 2011, the largest fatality rate for Afghan civilians. So if you could expand on that, how do you see that you're progressing in your country?
Yes, indeed, we have been progressing since 2001. I was in Kabul. I was fighting the Taliban myself. And so the life was very difficult, not in terms of only casualties, but also in terms of living conditions. Living conditions were very difficult, very harsh during the Taliban time. But we have tremendous achievements. You have to travel to Afghanistan to visit Kabul and other cities. Especially the Afghan youth, the younger generation, they have access to education. Healthcare is reaching almost faraway villages in Afghanistan, and we have other achievements. Our economy is growing very fast, and we have hope that we could live among our neighbors and the rest of the world, at least as a respected nation, which during the Taliban time we didn't have. During the Taliban time, our economy was based on narco traffic.
Okay.
So
all right, let me get Mr.
have
Hallinan. I'm sorry.
The other sectors that are emerging.
All right, let me get Mr. Hallinan on this. What's your take, Mr. Hallinan? You're an American. Mr. Mir says that the United States has been a liberating force in that country. Your take on this?
Well, if they were a liberating force, then they would have liberated the country, and the country's not liberated. And I think what you have to do is to take the next step, which is that just recently, about a month ago, the Taliban reissued a peace proposal, which was originally proposed back at the end of 2008 or early 2009. And it called for cutting ties with Al-Qaeda, which they're perfectly willing to do. The Taliban is not the same as Al-Qaeda. They're a local organization. They also called for withdrawal of foreign troops, but not a specific timetable. In fact, the term that they used just last week was that the United States could set the timetable, but that they did want to guarantee that there would be no bases left in the United States. Now, this has been an ongoing position on the part of the Taliban, of which the Americans and NATO have never picked up on. There has to be a political solution to the war. The last nationwide polls in Afghanistan indicated that a large majority of Afghans realized there has to be a political settlement, that there has to be even a coalition government. In other words, I don't want the Taliban to take over. I don't think they are going to take over. But they are going to have to be part of whatever emerges from this. So why are we still fighting? If that's the end game, and the United States, at least in public, says that's the end game, why are we continuing these night raids? Why are we continuing this offensive in the south? Why are we continuing the drone war in Pakistan?
And why do you think, let me pose the same question that you're asking, Mr. Hallinan. Why do you think that that is the case?
Okay. Well, I think that there are two reasons. I think, first of all, there is a division of the House. The military, the U.S. military, doesn't want this to be a wasted war. They want to be able to claim that they pressured the Taliban into negotiating, okay? That's not going to happen. So the military is pressing on its own. There are other people in the American government. Remember, the government does not talk with one voice in the United States. There are other people who believe that that whole question of the strategic role of Afghanistan in Central Asia is very important. And my colleague in London is absolutely correct. A good deal of this has to do with China and has to do with Iran and shipping energy supplies to China. So this is part of that. All of those things are in play there. And there isn't just one kind of thing. But basically, the Obama administration has said there has to be a negotiated end to this. We can't have a military victory. So the question I put to them is, they've got this peace proposal. It's on the table. Why don't you sit down and start talking about it? Call a ceasefire. That's the first thing you do. Call a ceasefire. Stand in place and begin the negotiations now.
Okay.
I think there is a possibility of a diplomatic end to this.
All right. Well, your perspective, Mr. Chandan, why doesn't the U.S. at this point in time, we see that Saturday was the deadliest day for U.S. troops in that country. Why wouldn't they, as Mr. Hallinan has just suggested, try to arrange a ceasefire and then continue to talk, as many are saying now in Washington that there's not a military solution to the situation in Afghanistan?
When the United States and Britain have so demonized an enemy like the Taliban through their media, amongst their public, it's going to be some time before there's any kind of ceasefire process in negotiating with the Afghan resistance, national resistance, which is the Taliban. But it's very clear in the press, the mainstream press of the West, that there is a clear admission, and clearly in the BBC news as well, they're clearly admitting they cannot win in Afghanistan, that they essentially have lost. And we know that there's senior Taliban people who have come to London on the condition that they have no public meetings, in negotiating with the British and with the Americans and with NATO some kind of defeat for the NATO occupation. This is exactly what's happening. The Taliban, and God bless our ancestors, and God please forgive our ancestors that there are still people today who are welcoming in the Crusaders, who are welcoming in the colonizers. How many hundreds of years ago did the British decimate Afghanistan and decimate, which was India then, which is today Pakistan, and my own land, Punjab as well? We don't forget this. And as they say in Africa, the leopard doesn't change its spots. The neo-colonists today, NATO does not change its spots. It's not interested in our liberation of any sort. It's interested in domination and conducting that domination through state terror. That's what's going on. Taliban are a very sophisticated national resistance movement. When the NATO attack on Libya was about to happen, the Taliban made a statement only stating, no criticism of Gaddafi, saying this is yet another NATO attack on a Muslim state. And Gaddafi, for his part, a few weeks ago made a speech where he said his people's resistance against NATO is defending Syria and Iran as well. And this is what we need. We need a unity of the Global South. We need clarity of the peoples of the Global South and their supporters to understand what's going on. We are living through the last days of the empire, the last days of the economic empire and the military empire. In these last days, we don't know what NATO are going to pull out the hat. I'm fearing NATO is looking for a de-escalation in Afghanistan to free up its troops to attack Syria. This is what the Russian envoy to NATO has said, and what the Russian NATO to envoy said is reminiscent of what Castro said on the first day of the counter-revolutionary pro-NATO protests in Libya, when he said NATO is coming for Libya. So really we have to see what exactly is going on here. We have to listen to our Russian friends, listen to our Libyan friends, and unite once again, like we did in the non-aligned movement of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s and 80s. If Libya fell, Libya is the shield of Africa. If Libya fell, who do you think they're going to go after next? Algeria. Who are they going to go after? Algeria. South Africa. With Julius Malema, the new revolutionary leader of the Youth League of the ANC, Empire and the Western press is going crazy calling him a new Mugabe. And the South Africans know that they are the next targets as well for the West. We have to be careful. These are the last days of the empire. But in the last days, our vigilance has to grow, our unity has to grow. And in this, we are slightly lacking. We are seeing too many of our people fall for the tricks of NATO in relation to Libya and Syria and others. We have to maintain vigilance, sister.
Okay, what do you mean by the tricks? We're almost out of time because I just want to finish up with what we're talking about in Afghanistan and in general, the connection with everything else. What do you mean by following, the people are following with the tricks of NATO? 30 seconds, please.
What? Sure, what's happening in Libya? Some people are calling the Libyan counter-revolutionary pro-NATO rebels revolutionaries. They're not. These people have invited NATO to bomb their own country. Too many people are supporting the protests in Syria, which clearly has a Saudi, Zionist, and right-wing Lebanese and empire agenda behind it. So really, we should really think critically, step back, look at the bigger picture, and actually foil and sabotage the conspiracies and the plans of US hegemony and NATO aggression.
Okay, and I'd like to thank all my guests for this program. Unfortunately, we are out of time. From Kabul, political analyst Mr. Haroun Mir. From Berkeley, California, Foreign Policy in Focus, Mr. Conn Hallinan. And from London, independent filmmaker and political analyst, Mr. Sukant Chandan. Thank you all for being with us. And as always, viewers, I'd like to thank you for being with us in another program for our news analysis. And make sure you join us here, same time, same place tomorrow, as we take a look at one of tomorrow's top headline stories. Well, I'm Marzieh Hashemi, signing out for myself and all the crew here in Tehran. Thank you so much for being with us, and goodbye.